Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Shelby. It still feels really weird to say that every time, but hello, I'm here. And today we have an instructional video for you. I know, this is not a category I tend to excel in. We are talking about making paper. This is going to be just the very bare minimum. I really didn't get too experimental with this, but I'm going to talk about all of my failures in trying to do this. Let's do it. So, the difference between my attempts would be painfully obvious, I would say. This is before. Lots of chunks, very weird shapes, like almost too thick that you can't, it doesn't peel, it peels weird. It's so thick and like hard versus sheets of paper. And now these do still have some chunks, but overall they look like paper. Now, how, you're asking, did we get from this atrocity to this? Let me tell you. I unfortunately like to try my way to hack through things, and it's a blessing and a curse that I try to do it, and I'm a person who likes to work with what I have on hand, and I just needed to admit months ago I had nothing on hand to make this. And basically it all came down to I just refused to properly create a frame for the paper making. I refused to just get proper tools, so this is where we finally ended up. It's just little pieces of wood I sawed, stapled together, and then stapled. This is tulle, like the fabric. You can use like mesh, really anything of that that's gonna just be able to just let water drain through onto here. So tip number one, just get what you actually need to. It's not expensive. I was just trying to like hack the system that's already not hard to begin with. Second, another item you will need is a blender, and mine has seen a lifetime of blending. It barely works. You have to be very mindful of the amount you put in, which is the case for all, but it really feels to be the case for this one. So there was a large adjustment period for me to realize what was truly like a pulp and get better at picking out large pieces of paper. Or you get large scraps of paper in your thing, which depending on what you're using it for might not be the biggest deal, but after a while, when you have entire sheets that almost feel unusable, it's kind of annoying. So that was definitely my two really big mistakes in between the two papers. So right off the top of my head, all of the tools you need to make paper are paper, ripped into scraps. Most people recommend like 1 by 1 inch squares. I kind of vary. I just like hand shred everything, and after it's shredded it will need to soak in water. Generally most people recommend at least, like, some have said 30 minutes, some have said up to 2 hours, some say soak overnight. I've like let them soak for just a few hours and they've been fine, but it depends on the strength of your paper. Just like cheap white paper, like mailing that you get, it's gonna soak pretty much immediately and probably be fine to use. But if you're using a thicker, like if you're trying to use like a paper bag or some kind of thicker brown paper, that's gonna take longer to soak and it should be shredded much more finely. That's the type of paper I definitely struggled the most in mine with chunks. After your paper has soaked for whatever time you selected, let it sit, you will need to blend it. And now this is filling a blender with a about halfway to 3/4 of water, putting, like, generally people say like 2 to 3 scoops of paper scraps into there, blending it up so that it all becomes like a mushy pulp. And then you need to pour this substance into a bucket of water where all of your like pulp mush will rest, and is where you will start to strain your paper. So obviously this depends on what container you have, how full of water it is, a lot of things. But basically you want to have a good layer of, I'm going to keep calling it mushy paper, to be able to grab a good bit so that it creates a paper density. You will want a relatively good sized bin or bucket, whether it's just like really long so you can like get your arms in there, or I just use like storage totes, which isn't the most convenient because you really have to like dip in, but it's just what I have on hand that was the easiest and most spacious. Now that you have a nice papery pulp mush mixture in your water, you're going to need, I know this is called a mold and decal, but I don't know which is which. I've Googled it a few times and I keep forgetting, but you will need the layer that has the mesh on it for straining, and then you need a top piece. Typically people just make two and then layer, but these are from two different sets. So you want to layer them like this, because this top piece that doesn't have mesh on it is going to give you the structure and like depth to your paper, like how thick it is basically. And then to remove the top, you will have a wet, mushy piece of paper sitting on your mesh or tool or whatever you choose to use, and then you can press it onto whatever surface you want it to dry on. I personally, being in a very small space, found the easiest thing to use were beach towels, bath towels, wash rags, anything like that. Some people use bed sheets, especially if you have the space and like outside space to lay out a bed sheet and like place them on there. You obviously have to be mindful of wind and whatnot, but like if you can get them under the sun and spread out, these should dry in like no time for you. But again, I've used basically any surface you can, and to help them kind of secure to the towel as well as begin to release more water, because there's definitely just water sitting in them, you're going to want a sponge of some kind, or some people use a rolling pin and place like another towel on top of them. I like to do the sponge method because I enjoy doing it while the paper is still on the frame, like I'm pressing it against the towel. I think it helps release the paper from the mesh or tool to the towel a bit. So I personally have gone for the sponge method. I have found it to be the best. That's basically all you need, and then it just comes down to drying time. So that is the very bare bones what my experience has been putting paper together. What you need is very, very simple overall. I would say getting the frame or mold and decal is the most complicated, in air quotes, part, and it really doesn't have to be at all. Don't be me, just do what everyone tells you to do. You can also use an embroidery hoop because it'll secure, like, again, tulle or mesh or whatever, and keep it taut. I just didn't have one at a size I liked, and I didn't want circle paper, but that is an option if that's something you have on hand. With making paper, obviously, you can use color dye to change the color of the pulp and make your photos a certain color. You can do this naturally as well, depending on like your creativity with different skins or flowers or things that have a lot of pigment. A lot of people I know like to use dried flowers and lay them on the top of the water pulp mixture, and then when you grab it with your mold and decal, the flowers will kind of like dry into the paper. But I have read that people say to use dried flowers, do not use fresh flowers. I don't know. I'm gonna guess it helps with the drying process and like it keeps them better instead of them being like possibly getting gross. I would also recommend, once it's like, you have options for this. While it's drying, if you do like a double layer towel effect, you could press something on top of them to help squeeze water out as well as flatten paper. Or what I like to do is after they've dried for like a day or so, I'll move them to another towel that's freshly dried and press like a book on them or something. So that comes down to personal preference and space and whatnot. So just to wrap this all up, I would say I've had friends ask me like my experience doing this. I do not think it's hard per se. I think you need to be okay with giving up a good bit of time and a good bit of space. So that just comes down to like what you're not gonna like you're most likely, especially if you're not a big DIY person, you're not just gonna like finish this in a few hours. There's prep work, you need to have a blender that you definitely should have a blender just for this. You should not like use your food blender. Like go to the thrift store and find another blender. Do not use your food blender, please. But there's a good bit of prep work, there's a good bit of like just steps involved, and then you're waiting for the paper to dry, and like there are gonna be times even when you start to get in the groove that just pieces don't work, you have to mush them back up and throw them back in. And that's like the great thing as well as the most annoying thing, is it's not always surefire. But I would say overall, especially, I would recommend this as like a summer activity if you've never done it before, because I think it could just be like really nice to just like be outside, mixing it all up, especially if you have the space for it, and letting them kind of sit out in the sun, and it would probably quicken every step that I've basically already described. But yeah, I don't know. Overall, I would say, again, not hard to do. I think you just have to be like truly dedicated to the time and like space required for it. I think this is super fun, and even if you maybe like have struggled yourself, there's so many sellers online, especially on like Etsy, small businesses that are starting to sell their own homemade paper, people who've gotten really good at it, that if that's something you really like, whether it's for drawing, writing a special letter, bookbinding, anything, if you even just like this style of really nice handmade paper, people sell it online. So, you know, wouldn't be a bad thing if it just interests you to check it out. There's so many just the cool shops online who make their own. So I've just been really enjoying it, and hopefully this was helpful in some capacity. That's all. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't, and I'll try my best to do, I do a whole bunch of things, but subscribe if you're interested, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.